You're sitting across from someone. They're telling you something important, maybe the most important thing they've said all year, and you realize you don't know what to feel. Not sad, not happy, not anxious, just blank. That moment where you know you should be feeling something but the signal isn't arriving. That gap between what's happening and what you feel about it is widening. And for the first time, researchers have measured exactly how much. Between 2019 and 2024, emotional intelligence scores dropped by nearly 6% worldwide. That's data from 28,000 adults across 166 countries. But the headline number isn't the story. The real story is what's happening to one generation in particular, and how fast. Generation Z is losing the ability to navigate emotions at nearly 3 times the rate of any generation before them. This isn't opinion, it's measured. To understand what's happening, we need to know what emotional intelligence actually is. It's not about being sensitive. It's not about being emotional at all. Emotional intelligence is a set of cognitive tools, 8 core competencies that let you recognize what you're feeling, understand why, and decide what to do about it. Things like intrinsic motivation, the drive that comes from inside you. Optimism, not blind positivity, but the ability to see possibility in difficulty. The ability to pursue meaningful goals. And navigation, knowing how to move through difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. These aren't personality traits you're born with, they're skills, which means they can be developed. But it also means they can decline. The research comes from the 6 Seconds Emotional Intelligence Assessment, one of the most widely validated EQ measures on the planet. Published in Frontiers in Psychology in 2025, this study tracked 28,000 adults over 5 years. What they found wasn't subtle. Global emotional intelligence scores declined by 5.79% from 2019 to 2024, statistically significant decreases across all 8 competencies, every single one. The effect size was a Cohen's d of 0.22. That might sound small. It's not. At population scale, it represents a massive shift in human capability. But here's where it gets worse. Optimism, the ability to see possibility through difficulty, dropped by over 8%, the steepest decline of any competency. The ability to navigate emotions, to feel something difficult without drowning in it, declined by nearly 6%. These are the coping tools we use to get through hard days. Now, a 5 or 6% drop might not sound alarming. We're still talking about most people functioning, but aggregate declines don't tell individual stories. And when researchers looked at generational data, they found something that changed the entire picture. Generation Z, people born roughly between 1997 and 2012, showed emotional intelligence declines nearly 3 times faster than older generations. Between 2019 and 2020 alone, just 1 year, Gen Z scores on navigating emotions dropped by 21%, 21% in 12 months. This wasn't gradual. This was a cliff, and it happened right as the world was entering the most uncertain period most of these young people had ever experienced. Let me be clear about what this isn't. It's not about Gen Z being weak or fragile. That narrative misses everything. This is about a generation that's been handed a set of circumstances that actively work against emotional development, and the data shows it. The study found that well-being declined by 6.45% globally, quality of life dropped by 5.48%, relationships suffered a 4.88% decline. Even effectiveness at work dropped by nearly 4.4%. These aren't separate problems, they're all connected by the same underlying decline. Think about it this way. Emotional intelligence isn't a luxury, it's the operating system that lets you adapt when circumstances change. When you lose the ability to navigate your own emotions, you don't just feel worse, you become worse at everything that requires other people. The researchers put it bluntly, workplaces now have a significant portion of their workforce entering with impaired ability to process uncertainty. And uncertainty isn't going away. If anything, the only certainty about the next decade is that things will keep changing in ways we can't predict. The study calls this the emotional recession, and they argue it represents a structural risk to workforce resilience worldwide. That phrase, structural risk, is important. It means this isn't a temporary blip. It's a shift in the baseline that affects everything built on top of it. The reason this matters for organizations, people with higher emotional intelligence were over 10 times more likely to report strong overall life outcomes. 10 times, that's not a small advantage. That's the difference between people who thrive and people who merely survive. And it flows in both directions. EQ predicts well-being, but well-being also predicts EQ. When you're struggling, it's harder to develop these skills, which means this can become a downward spiral. Less emotional intelligence leads to worse outcomes, which makes it harder to build emotional intelligence. But the research also found something that cuts through the darkness. Leaders who demonstrate trust and empathy behaviors see turnover rates 40% lower than their peers. 40%. That's not a marginal improvement. That's the difference between a team that stays together and one that falls apart. So what do we do with this? Is this just bad news about a declining world, or is there something actionable here? Here's what the research suggests. First, emotional intelligence is trainable. Unlike IQ, which is relatively fixed, EQ responds to deliberate practice. Start with granularity. Instead of saying you feel stressed or fine, which tells you almost nothing, get specific. What exactly is this feeling? Is it frustration, disappointment, overwhelm? These aren't the same thing, and naming them accurately is the first step to navigating them. Optimism can be practiced too. Not fake positivity, but the habit of asking, what's one possible good outcome here, before defaulting to worst-case thinking. The research shows optimism was the hardest hit competency, but it also responds well to intervention. It's a muscle you can rebuild. For leaders, and honestly anyone who works with other people, the data is clear. Trust and empathy aren't soft skills. They're protective factors. Showing up consistently, asking how someone is actually doing and waiting for the real answer, these behaviors reduce turnover by 40% in the study. And if you're part of Gen Z, or if you're raising or managing someone who is, know that the deck was stacked. This isn't a personal failing. The generation that grew up with smartphones in their pockets and a pandemic in their formative years didn't choose those circumstances. They're adapting to them. And adaptation takes time. Emotional intelligence wasn't meant to be learned alone, staring at a screen. It was meant to be learned in relationship, which brings us back to where we started. That moment of blankness, of knowing you should feel something but not quite accessing it. It's not a flaw in you. It's a symptom of a world that's been making emotional processing harder while demanding more of it than ever. The way forward isn't to mourn what's declining. It's to understand the mechanism and then choose to develop these skills deliberately. Name the emotion, practice optimism, build trust in small moments. These aren't platitudes, they're interventions backed by data from 166 countries. If this kind of research interests you, consider subscribing. We cover stories like this every week, always going deeper into the psychology that shapes daily life. The emotional recession isn't destiny. It's a diagnosis. And like any diagnosis, it tells you where to focus your attention. The researchers are clear. This isn't about going backward. The world has changed. Emotional intelligence needs to evolve with it. What worked for previous generations might not work now, but the underlying competencies, understanding yourself, connecting with others, those remain essential. So here's the question to sit with. Not, are we declining? The data already answers that. But what are we going to do about it? Because emotional intelligence isn't just about feeling better. It's about being able to navigate whatever comes next, and something's always coming next. I'm curious what you've noticed in your own experience. Has this resonated with something you've seen in yourself or in the people around you? The conversation doesn't end here, it's just beginning to get honest.